Industry Insider coming to you from BigSound 2012. We're on the rooftop of Limes Hotel. It's brought to you by Jay Dillon. Joining me, Nick DiDia from Studios 301. How are you, mate?
Very well, thanks.
Have you just arrived at BigSound?
I literally got here a half hour ago.
Oh well, thank you.
Walked over as fast as I could.
Thank you for coming over so promptly. I mean, I'm sure you're swamped already with meetings and things that you have to do through the duration of the couple of days.
It's going to be a busy few days, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, excellent. Now, let's start off. Let's start off right at the beginning with you, Nick, and how you got into the production side of music, and what piqued your interest to do that.
It was a little bit of a fluke. I had I was in early 20s and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And my brother was working in radio at the time, and I was thinking about going and doing live sound for bands. I was really interested in music, and he said, "No, you got to get in the studio. That's where you should be. That's where the records are made." So it was that. Yeah. It was that funny that it happened that way. And he dropped me off at a studio, and I was an intern, which basically meant coffee and toilets. Yeah. But that's how everybody kind of started.
Everybody out there watching this has been an intern's gone, yeah. I remember that, yeah.
It's a common story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's a little bit of a weeding out process, because you really have to want to do it. Yeah. To do that. And then it was just a pretty natural progression for me. It was just showing up all the time and being there, and then learning from people who were making records. I was lucky enough to be in a place where there weren't a lot of people interning and assisting. So I was immediately thrown into it, which really, in the end, it was scary at first, but it really helped. Mm. And that's kind of how my career's been ever since. Yeah. Just gotten thrown into things, and you just do your best, and try to make it happen.
Yeah. Now, I mean, coming under that sort of pressure, everyone gets a bit nervous when they first get into whatever respective field they get into in the music business. What was the process in your thinking to keep yourself there? I mean, you do feel a lot of pressure, even though you're only just interning a lot of the time.
Well, I had a pretty solid. I didn't have a really solid musical background, but I had a really solid electronics background. So as far as the engineering side of things, I was pretty confident, probably more than most people when you walk into a studio, of how everything worked. Even though it wasn't specific to the board and everything, I knew how electronics worked and had a good foundation there. So that helped my confidence a lot, because a lot of people who, especially when I started, a lot of people didn't have that knowledge. It was either a more, hey, I was a bass player in a band and now I want to learn how to make records. People usually didn't come from my side, which was more technology based, I guess. Yeah. Even though it wasn't recording technology in particular, it was electronic gear. Yeah. So yeah, and then it's just a matter of, you just keep at it, and if you love it enough, I think that you put up with everything you need to put up with. And
how long was that? Everyone gets to that point where they go, all right, I've pushed and I've pushed and I've pushed, and maybe I'm not going to get there, and then everyone gets to that point where that one thing happens, where you say to yourself, okay, all of that hard work and all of that, all of those hard times I've gone through, it's finally paid off. I've finally arrived to a position where I can say, I'm here. Can you pinpoint that at all?
Not really. It was a progression of, hey, now I'm doing this. I've got more responsibility. I'm learning. Like, you just learn so much, and that's one of the great things about the job, is you just continue to learn. Mm-hmm. So that it keeps you interested. And but yeah, it was a long process, but I was having a really good time the whole time, even when I was cleaning the toilets and making the coffee, because I was fascinated by just record making and all that stuff. So just being around it was enough for me to be really excited. And then, it was a little bit, even in my own mind, a sort of overnight success, where I was just doing what I was doing for 10 years, and then suddenly people were going, "Oh, I've heard that record. Yeah, I know that guy because he worked on that record." So, but it was, if you look at it from when I started to when the first record I worked on that was actually anticipated by people, which would have been probably Pearl Jam Versus, I would engineered that, and that was actually the first record for myself, and probably for Brendan O'Brien, who produced it, that people were actually waiting to hear that record. Yeah. And it hadn't happened to me certainly before that.
Did you know that expectation was coming?
Well, yeah,
while
because
you were going through the process of
yeah, because 10 was giant.
Yeah,
I mean, the
yeah.
record before was huge, and that was the first time. There were a lot of other bands that we had worked with, or not a lot, but Stone Temple Pilots was a good example. We were making that record. They were called Mighty Joe Young. Nobody knew who they were except the label, and they had a fan base in California, but compared to what it ended up being, it was really small. So it wasn't like people were waiting for that first Stone Temple Pilots record.
Yeah.
Other than the band and the label
right.
and us, because we thought it was really good. But that Pearl Jam record was the first one that was like, I'd tell people that I was working on Mighty Joe Young, and they'd go, "Oh, okay, whatever."
Yeah.
And I'd say I'm working on Pearl Jam, and it was like, "Wow, that's
Yeah.
So that was probably I don't want to think how many years that was. It was a lot of years,
Yeah.
but it wasn't it wasn't hard for me to do that, just because I really loved being in the studio.
Yeah. Now tell us about. There's so many names of artists pop up reading through your biography and just doing a bit of research on yourself. You've already mentioned two of them: Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots. Springsteen's in there as well. Can you take us through some of the work you did there?
That was that was a pretty special record, especially the first one for me and Brendan too, because we were both fans. I grew up in New Jersey, so I was like, when you're born in New Jersey, you have to be a Bruce Springsteen fan. And it's funny because when I was growing up, it was so played on the radio all over the country, but especially in New Jersey. That it almost turned me off from him when I was younger, and as I got a little older, I just started making records. I really appreciated the records, and then we had and this was much later. I was much older when we did the first record, and The Rising, and that was just, it was a blast. We were really prepared to do it, and by this point, I think that we knew what we were doing, or else he wouldn't have hired. Well, he hired Brendan, and I came along.
Yeah.
But and it was really impressive to impress him.
Yeah.
For us,
Absolutely.
that's what we were trying to do. Is this guy's made so many records? They've all been, they're iconic and all this. Let's make him think that, or it wasn't a conscious effort, but we wanted to make him think that, wow, this is one of the best experiences I've ever had in the studio, which he said it was, and I believed him. But yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah.
And then working with a guy like that who had done so much already, and just saw how committed he was to everything he was doing at that moment was inspiring.
Yeah.
Really inspiring.
Now you've also I noticed there were two major moves early in your career, in 1991 and in 1996. One was Atlanta, the other one was, it just escapes me. It's
Well, I moved to LA in 91.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a fluke. I was working at John Bon Jovi's house. We had built a studio in his basement, and I became the de facto assistant engineer. They weren't working there all the time, but when they would do stuff, I was called in to kind of help because I knew the room and everything. And so we were working on a record, and the engineer, Robbie Jacobs, asked me to come out to LA for 2 weeks to help finish the record that they were doing overdubs on at John's house in New Jersey. And I never went back. I went for 2 weeks and stayed. At that point, it was very easy to move.
And why,
Yeah, it was pretty fantastic. I mean, to me, I thought that, working for John, who was a great guy, and he treated us great, and we were working on things that were either records or were about to become records, demos for some of their stuff. Thought, wow, that's one of those moments, like, this is really cool. And then getting to LA and working at A&M Studios then it was like, wow, this is really great. And I was still basically just assisting at that point.
Yeah.
And then after living there for a couple of years, I met Brendan. Again, it was sort of a fluke. He was aware of me because my brother and him worked at the same label. Brendan was a staff producer, and my brother Mark was a GM at the label. Constantly saying, you should hire my brother.
Yeah, right.
And Brendan going,
good brother does that. Right?
Yeah, that's what brothers do.
Yeah.
Nepotism,
Yeah.
Awesome. And Brendan, being a good producer, was like, no, dude, I've got my engineer, it's all good. And it was just a fluke. His guy couldn't be there one week, and he said, hey, is your brother still around? And I went and worked with him, and that was kind of it.
That's history.
Yeah, 20 years later, we were still are making records. Although the last one we made was the Gaslight record, which